Welcome to Season 2 of Common Time Podcast. I'm David Clemmer.
And I'm John Pasquale.
And we're back to inspire and empower music educators with practical advice, thought-provoking conversations, and stories from some of the best in the business. Let's dive into another incredible episode. Our guest today is Julie Giroux. Welcome, Julie.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Julie is an Emmy Award-winning composer of film, television, video games, and wind symphony music. Travels the country, and we are excited to have some time today with you. John, why don't you get us started?
Indeed. Hi, Julie. Thanks so much for being here. So I'm just going to get started with just some kind of backstory for our listeners. Are you able to share the story of how composing began for you and how it inspired you to become a composer for your career?
I guess like every musician, we all have that one pivotal moment that goes, yes, that's what I'm going to do. I didn't have that. My grandfather played piano, and he couldn't read music, but he was a bartender, and because of the age, he was the living jukebox basically, and he could play anything, and I mean anything. All he had to do was hear it once, and he could play it. And so when he would come over, and I remember. I was not much older than 3, about the time when we actually, as human beings, can remember, is because we don't remember anything before the age of 3. But it was amazing just to see him do it. And he would always tell stories all the time he was doing it. He would just make up all kinds of stuff, just entertain us all. And as soon as he would leave the house, I would try to play what he played. And so that's what I did. I just never really thought I was going to make a living being a composer. I was always composing, but I met Francis Macbeth when I was about 13, maybe, and then right behind him, Jim Barnes, not far behind that, and then and then a few others. But even after meeting people that were actually making a living doing it, I just didn't think anybody made a living being a composer. I really didn't. So I just never entertained that thought. So all my scholarships were for horn because I was a French horn player, and again, writing all through junior high. I was writing for band and writing for high school. I was even publishing music with Southern Music. My first piece was Mystery on Mina Mountain. I was 13 when I wrote it.
That's awesome.
But again, didn't think, I thought it was a fun hobby.
At what point did it go from hobby to I'm going to do this? When did that happen?
That was with Bill Connie, who wrote Rocky and Karate Kid and all that stuff. And he won his Oscar for The Right Stuff. So he came to LSU, which is where I was at. And he was, back then the Olympics were every 4 years. We didn't have the 2-year thing. And so, but they did do mock Olympics at the 2-year mark. And so they were doing that one that particular year at LSU. So they had Bill to come do the theme music. He wrote the theme music for it. He actually wrote a lot of theme music for the Olympics over the years, but and so he was going to come conduct the Baton Rouge Symphony, which was a professional orchestra, still is, and they asked him, and it was ESPN. They said, well, Bill, we want you to write this, we want you to do this and conduct. At that time, he had like 9 or 10 themes on television that were his television shows. It's a record nobody's ever going to break.
Yeah.
And they said, and we'd like you to write some charts for us to accompany a rock group we're going to have there. And he was like, no, no, I don't do that. You're going to have to get somebody else. And they said, well, who do you have any ideas? He said, no, that's typical Bill too. And so they called the Baton Rouge Symphony and they said, hey, do you have anybody there that does charts? And they said, there's only one person in this town that's doing those kind of things. And it was me. I'm 19. So,
Wow.
because I went to college young because And not because I'm smart, but because I grew up in Arizona, so they could send you to school at 4. They didn't care, just out. There was no kindergarten at that time either.
Yeah.
So out you go. If you had the beginnings of reading, you could go.
You
So
can do it. Yeah.
yeah. So they call me and say, Julie, we need you to do 8 charts of the Baton Rouge Symphony backing up a rock band. And I'm like, okay. I've obviously never done that before. Most people haven't. That's not something that you would ever want to do. I mean, you've got the orchestra, and because it's a pop gig, you've already got a rhythm section, and they have a rhythm section, and now you have 2 rhythm sections, 2 bass players, just a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
So I did it. And if somebody asked me to do that today, I'd say absolutely not, because it's difficult. And I was young and stupid, and sure, yeah, I'll do it. Oh, and I'm gonna get paid even better. So here comes the first rehearsal, and there's Bill, larger than life, and every brass player, had a picture of Rocky on their wall. I mean, no one. 13 of the best trumpet players in the world used to
Right.
record that. I mean, Doc Severson and
Yep.
oh gosh, yeah, Herb, the guy from Herb Albert. Oh man, I can't think of his name. But so he conducts, and I'm watching him conduct, and I'm like, wow, this is so cool. And that's who it is. And because also composers usually, like myself, are hard on the eyes, so we don't make covers of albums. It's
Sure.
some tiny little thing in the bottom at best. If they take one look at you and go, we're just gonna use your name. Okay, big fonts. So so I wouldn't have known him, by looking at him. I wouldn't have known him. But of course, he introduced himself, and so he got up there and conducted away. And then they were like, okay, now we got to do these other charts. And so I have never conducted in my life, ever. I never wanted to. Now, I made fun of every conductor I'd ever been under for all my friends and family since 5th grade. So I knew how to do it, but I'd never done it seriously. So I get up there and I'm conducting, and he didn't have anything to say about my conducting, probably because most composers are crap conductors, but it's true. And so he starts giving me pointers, not on how to conduct, but on how to conduct true rhythm sections. What do you do? What's this format? And he's like, this is what you do. And I'm like, okay, great. So we only had the one rehearsal. And then, I mean, this was pro stuff that I was being sucked into. And so the next day is the concert. And it's a Saturday, and I think at that time, I want to say LSU's stadium at that time was 83,000, 84,000. I don't know. Of course, it was full, and the runner comes in with the torch and the whole thing. And Bill starts conducting away. And so my conducting debut was on live television on ESPN in front of all those people. And the orchestra was in the end zone, because there was all kinds of festivities going out on the field. So I had a headset on, and so I had the producer and directors in one channel, and then I had the rock band in the other channel. So it was really unnerving. I didn't get any practice at that at all, so that was kind of surprising. But that was my debut, live television, conducting the Baton Rouge Symphony, backing up the Rolling Stones on the 50-yard line. And here we go.
There you go.
There we
That's
go.
an incredible story.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and you just finished your 7th symphony. So I mean, you have just a long history that started a televised debut, which is crazy. So for our listeners out there, Julie's also a big dog lover. And if you're only listening and not watching, she has a puppy with her. It's like in her lap. So you'll hear some little noises here and there. It's kind of for those that are just listening on the podcast, like, what's that noise? We've got a dog on it with us as well. So
Yeah, but I have more than this. People always ask me how many dogs you have, and I said, just imagine an unhealthy number, and I have more than that. So, because I already had 4 dogs, and then when my mom died, it was like she made me promise always, for 10 years, that if something happened to her, I would take her dogs. I'm like, it's easy to say yes because you're like, you're going to live a lot longer. No problem. But she
right.
did. And then, so I brought 3 more, so 7. And that's like Humane Society level for me. And it is a full-time job. And not to mention that, one of them is 215 pounds. And
Oh,
yeah, he plays for keeps too. I mean,
Yeah, I bet.
can
he's
ride him like a wow.
Yeah.
I know
So
Sounds like a
I've
horse.
yeah,
That's a
he's
I
horse.
followed you. I mean, I followed that whole experience of picking him up and the whole
oh,
process online, and it is pretty amazing to see his growth. Like that guy's big.
he is.
Like
I
I can't even
mean,
imagine it.
his
Like
feet are as big as horses.
yeah,
And
it's
Amazing.
crazy.
yeah, it's like so. That was how I got into it. And then two
Yeah.
weeks later, Bill calls me at home, and now school's out for the summer. I've been out like all of 2 days, and he calls and he says, "Julie, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Bill, I'm a horn major, so I'm not doing anything. What are you doing?" And he said, "Look, I just got this mini series, mini television series." And I could really use another orchestrator, and I could really use somebody to write source music. And I'm like, well, I don't know what source music is, but I'd be more than happy to write it. And he said, oh, great. He said, we can be here. And I said, I can be there tomorrow. So I was. And so there's Bill, picks me up at LAX at noon, LA time. And at 2 o'clock, I was writing for North and South, the mini
Wow.
series. And he handed me like the timing book because, it wasn't computers in, it was still a book that
Hmm.
thick with just numbers all over it. And I said, Bill, man, I don't do math. I don't know what this is. This is math. And he's like, I don't do math either. He said, but this is it. Just look for this is where every eighth note falls at this tempo,
Wow.
page after page after page. And so you just want to, and then he gave me the rundown, and so that was it. And
Yeah.
then and then I never looked back.
Never look back. So I mentioned something like you just finished your seventh symphony, and I'm curious. I mean, now, like, what does your creative process look like when you're starting a new composition and going from sort of your initial idea to you just finished a product? So, what is that process like for you?
Well, it's just mayhem. Um, it's just not. I mean, I try to think a little bit ahead of time about um what the subject matter is going to be. Like because I write band music for fun. That's it. That's all I've ever done it. And originally when I started doing it, it was just because nobody told me what to write. Of course, nobody still tells me what to write, but in film, everyone tells you what to write,
Mm,
and I just got
yeah.
tired of that. No one likes that. And I think the only reason anybody stays in films is because of the money. You're just like,
Mm.
well, okay, it's a trade-off, and I never did like that. So writing for band, because I am doing it for fun, I always try to write about a subject that I like. That's all. And whenever I would have an idea for a subject I like, then I write one. And if I don't have another idea for one in 10 years, then I won't write another one in 10 years. But it could be tomorrow too. So let's hope not. Let's hope not.
Oh
Let's
yeah,
hope
because it's a
not.
long week for you
Been
finishing
a
up the
long week
seventh.
indeed for
Yeah.
you. So, Julie, if I could transition slightly, I think that one of the reasons why your compositions are so effective is that they resonate with the performers and the audience. How do you consider that, or do you, as you're writing for the medium of band or anything else that you write?
I think there are several categories in that question itself, and it's because of my background. And in film, when you are writing, only 8% of the world are musicians. So 92% of your audience, at the very least, has no clue what's going on musically. So when you compose for television, films, video games, whatever it is, you have to consider that. You have to consider what somebody that isn't a musician is going to like. And I did that for so many years that it became kind of a part of me. But also, when you're working in films, you always work the same guys. It's the same guys. Every film is the same guys. And so what you end up doing is writing for those guys. And women too. I'm just saying guys, but I'm meaning everybody. And I mean, you gotta give them at least a few licks that make them just go, oh God,
Right.
you want to scare them to death a few
Where they
times,
sit up
and
just a little bit closer.
yes, yes,
Exactly.
Yeah.
yeah, and you do that for all of them, because over the years you become friends with all of them, so you end up not writing for the directors or producers at all. I mean, yeah, you have to answer them, but they don't know about the inner workings. And so that kind of is who you're writing for, because those musicians are the ones that will. And I'll never forget this at the end of North and South, because it was the first project I worked with Bill on, right? And Bill loves writing 3 and 4 part inventions, just loves it. And so the end credits of North and South is a 4-part invention. And when the orchestra got through playing for orchestra,
Right.
of course, my sorry butt had to orchestrate that mess, but they stood up, when they got through playing it, they stood up and applauded, because they know how hard it is to write those things,
Yeah.
and how hard it is to play them and all of that. And so I'll never forget that. And so that's who you write for. You always write for the musicians. You don't care who the audience is. You don't care about any of it. Yes, you have to be sure that, Joe Blow gets it. But other than that,
Yeah.
you're just writing for them.
Gotcha. Kind of connected to that, I'm curious, how do you decide on what the sort of the tone or mood of a piece is going to be?
Well, in films, we call that a color palette. And what you do, like when I was studying with Jerry Goldsmith, when he was doing one of the aliens, I don't remember which one, but I remember him showing me his color palette, and it was so cool. And Bill, taught me a lot about them as well, and a lot of the other guys I studied with. But Jerry was crazy because he could reinvent himself with every flick, every single time. You didn't know it was you never knew it was him. You would sit there and wait for the credits to see who it was, because you didn't know it was him.
Right.
And everyone else, John Williams. I mean, when it's Johnny. Everybody knows when it's Johnny. You go, oh, there you go. And
Yeah.
then,
Sure.
or and Copeland. Jesus, yes. Oh my God, please, no more 4ths and 7ths. But yes, it's that kind of,
Right.
But that was not Jerry. And so that was his thing. And so when I studied from him, that's what I wanted to learn the most from him.
Yeah.
Was that, and it was all about the color palette. And what I mean by that is, like, you'll pick a scale or certain chords, or, Mark Isham had a great thing when he was first coming out and was doing a lot of films, The Hitcher and all those other pictures that he came out with in the 80s. He did a lot of stacked fifths. They were either overlaid but they were fifths. And that's a color palette. So
Right.
it can just be something of that nature. It doesn't whether it's a scale. Obviously, writing bookmarks from Japan, that was those scales.
Sure.
No, so that's easy one. But when it's alien, well, that's not easy. So now
Right.
you have to sit here and figure out,
Yeah.
okay, what is this? And in films, it's a little easier than with band. Well, it's a lot easier because you can pick sounds as your color palette.
Sure.
It's like, you can't forget the organ sound from Interstellar, because first of all, it was like a 1 terabyte sound in itself, because it had all of these things within it.
Yeah.
But they never stopped playing it. That was
Yeah.
the color palette for it, because it made everyone who was a musician just go, I gotta breathe, I gotta breathe, I gotta breathe,
Yeah.
because it never stopped.
Never did.
And it never did. And
I,
even
yeah.
non-musicians, they get that it doesn't stop, because they know that when you sing, you have to breathe. And when you talk,
Yeah,
you have
sure.
to breathe. So it doesn't just get musicians, it got everybody. That's a color palette.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what it is. So once I decided to do Titan, because it's about planets and constellations and all these other things that I'm crazy about. Because I'm like, there's levels of nerdism, and I'm like, I'm like president of a small nerd country somewhere. But so I I lucked out because I didn't have to have a color palette for the entire thing, but I did have to have
Mm.
6 of them because it was 6 movements.
Right.
So yeah, because they were all different, and so they couldn't even share. You didn't want to share the same
Yeah.
sound palette.
It's so
That's
interesting,
it.
this color palette concept. It's the first time I've heard of that. The irony here is I just watched Interstellar last week for the first time. I had never
Yeah.
seen it. And
It's
that
incredible.
that chord hit, and I literally was like my
Yes.
wife Teresa was with me, and I talked about that chord and how that organ played through the entire piece or the entire work, 3 hours. Like I was mesmerized by that.
Hmm.
Just that one thing. I was like, this is all tied together by this one chord that happened 3 hours ago.
Yes.
But I never thought of it as a color palette. Just a quick follow up. Do you do something similar in all of your band works? Or did it
Hmm.
just like, okay, so it is.
No,
And
I,
you've
yeah,
really applied that from your film work.
yes, but also, if you're not somebody that, some composers always sound like themselves, and some don't. And
Mm,
so the ones that always sound like themselves, I don't think they look for a color palette. They're just themselves all the time. It's
sure.
kind of
Yeah.
like, are you a character actor? Or can you only be yourself? And so I'm a character actor,
Mm,
and film composers are character actors. They have to be a different character for every film they work on. And I continue that in band mainly because I don't want to I'd get bored if I didn't.
mhm.
It's just, I'm, I don't know. It's just, if you look at a painting and you hear something, it's going to be from that painting. And that painting is the one that's giving you that color palette. And
Mm,
I think when you just sit at a keyboard or however you write and you think about the subject matter, that comes to you
mm.
at some point because you're trying to be that. I'm always trying to be whatever it is I'm writing. Some people don't do that, but
Mm.
a lot do. So
I would imagine this would be very complicated and challenging at times. I mean, all of our professions have their outstanding days and their challenging days. But I'm curious, specifically, have you had any challenges throughout your career as a composer? And if so, how have you overcome them?
I don't think I've had any challenges other than the ones that everybody has. I don't think I've had any different ones. But I mean, I think for the older you get, the harder it gets, the slower you get. And it's not because you're older. Of course, everything about you is slower at that point, but that's not slower. That's actually faster. But the older you get, the harder it is not to write the same notes that you've already written before. So it
Mm.
gets harder and harder and harder. Now, at some point, you can use the same sound palette from something 20 years ago, because first of all, nobody's going to remember it, but also because nobody's going to remember it. I mean, not
Right.
even you really. You go,
I mean,
oh,
that's
oh
fair.
yeah,
Yeah,
what about, So
sure.
you can reuse color palettes, but you actually tend not to, because most subjects are different from each other, and the what are the chances that they would sound the same?
Right.
I mean, there's just not much.
Yeah.
But I remember working on this one picture that was the first. It was really big, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, to write new film scores for silent movies. Write a score because it was all that stupid piano stuff and whatever, and
Right.
to
Yeah.
actually go see The Kid or any of those others with a real soundtrack. Oh, now it really is a movie, right? Even though
Right.
it's
Yeah.
silent. It is a movie. So the color palette that I did for, I'm trying to remember what the name of the film was, but it was Alfred Hitchcock's first film. So of course it was silent. And but I used that same color palette for another murder movie later because it was murder and it had that same kind of, but other than that, no.
Yeah, gotcha. So I'm interested. Do you have a favorite piece that you've written? And if you do, like what would make that one particularly special? Like, I mean, there's a lot to choose from. It's just like something that really, like, this is the one.
Well, yes. The short question is answer is yes, and it's because of the subject matter. If it's really heavy emotional experience for you, that ends up being one of your favorites just because of the places it took you when you were writing it. It just becomes more of a part of you. So yes, I have a close affinity to Rift and Wed because I know this sounds crazy, but when my dog of 17 years died, much like Piper, that dog was in my lap for every note I wrote for 17 years. And the day after she died, I didn't want to write, but I had to. And I sat down, and it was just overwhelmingly devastating to realize that she had gone all those places you go when you write. She had gone with me, and she was gone. So then the next project I had to write was Rift and Wed, and I was like, oh God. And so I have learned over the years, and I teach this to anybody that's studying with me also, is that if you have to write about something that is so emotionally devastating, don't do it. Don't do it. But find another vehicle that is just as devastating, but not yours. And that was Rift and Wed. That was the story that I had. For that was losing. In that particular case, it was losing your soulmate.
Right. Sure.
But during a time period when it wasn't just love, it was like, man, life is so much easier with the two of us, and we are actually tied into each other's survival as well. So that has that's the vehicle. So I kept not trying to think of her, the dog, but you can't stop your emotions. And so those emotions still wind up in that music. But you don't walk out into traffic afterwards because it's not it's just not someplace you want to put yourself emotionally day after day. And I remember, I don't even remember what president it was, but at 9/11, they called me and said, and tried to commission me to write a piece for 9/11, and I didn't even have to think about it. I said, nope, no, no. And it wasn't the guy. It was like one of his aides, that made the phone call to me. And I said, no. Well, we'll give you, no, not interested. And they were like, oh, well, why not? I was like, because that's 2,000, however many people it was. And I knew the number at that point. And I was like, I know myself. I'm going to research every single one of those people. Right. I'm going to wake up every day in this horrible place for God only knows how long. And no, because by that point in my career, I had done that before, and I knew how terribly dangerous it is to your psyche to do that. And it's no different than when you see actors kill themselves after roles because they've become that, or they've been acting like a psychopath for 6 months, and then afterwards they've just lost track of who they are. And Heath Ledger.
Yep.
Gosh, Oh, I can't think of his name now. But he did the life story of Capone, and then he ended up killing himself.
Wow.
He never got over it after that. He was a great actor too. Everybody will know the answer.
So just to change topic slightly, but in terms of collaboration and feedback in the compositional process, how do you deal with that?
Do you mean like when somebody commissions me and they tell me what they want me to write? Is that what you mean?
Sure.
Yeah, well, I don't
Sure.
let them do that.
There you go.
I mean,
Short
I
answer.
do, but I don't. You can tell when some people will commission me and they're just commissioning you because they like your music. They don't care what you write. Here's my band. We can play grade 5 and my trumpet sucks. Keep that in mind right away. And so, okay, thank you. And that's probably 80% of them. But there's always going to be the others that will come in and say, Charlie died, or we're getting a new building. Now, when they say we're getting a new building, I'm like, nope, no, that's very uninspiring to me. I mean, unless you're hiring some famous architect to build your new band hall, no, no, that doesn't, I can't write that. I mean, you have to write, music is going to be terrible from you if you are not emotionally invested in it. And I don't care what composer you are. And I don't care if that emotional investment is because of the check that you think you're going to get. That is still big emotional investment. In fact, that was probably the first thing I learned from Bill. Well, first of all, when he hired me, he didn't make me, but he was the epitome of a mentor. He made me live with him. I mean, I'm 19. I don't need to be running wild in Los Angeles, first of all. And secondly, I think he was like, I don't want anything to happen to you. So, just live here and, for a few months till you get your lay of the land, and then off you go. By then you'll figure out where you want to live and what kind of drive you want into the studios and blah, blah, blah. So I think Bill was doing a interview with PBS, and they were there in his living room. Well, I don't know what you call it. It wasn't his entry room, and it was like a formal living room. And every house I ever lived in as a kid was fit in that living room. I mean, it was ridiculous. And so they're sitting there doing the interview, and the first question, Mr. Connie, what really gets you emotionally invested? What inspires you to write? And he didn't even, not a beat went by. Money. And I went, oh my God, he did not just say money. Oh my God, he should have just said, he should have made something up, anything, But, and then he went to explain it. And he said, and this is why. Because she was shocked too. She was like, well, this is going to be I know this is going to be one hell of an interview. And so he said, because when someone calls you and says, Bill, I love your music. I love your music so much. I want you to write for my movie. I've got a $40 million movie and it's in your hands. And he said, that's all the inspiration I need. Somebody just has that much faith in what I do that they trust me to do the music for their film.
Wow.
And so yes, money is it for him, but that's why it's for him. Not that he doesn't do it for money, because trust me, if somebody's not writing a check, he's not writing. That's not happening. And that's a lot of them. But that was never me. I was always doing it. When I wasn't writing, I was writing something else. He was like, he would always point out that was the difference between us. He said, Julie, I'm a composer, but you're an artist. He said, I'm going to write when there's money. He says, you're going to write whether you have money, whether you don't have money, if you're homeless, you're on the street, you're going to write all the time. And he said, and that's the difference between us. And I was like, you're right. That's true.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice to give to aspiring composers?
Yes. Not what you think it's going to be, though. I'm sure, you don't have to do anything to be a composer, but write. That's it. You don't
Hmm.
have to go to school. You don't have to even work. I mean, all you have to do to be a composer is compose. I'm still waiting for someone in Los Angeles to ask me where I went to college because they don't give a flying, you know what.
Mhm.
They could care less. Can you do the gig or not? Can you do it or not? And so to be a composer, that's all you have to do. So if that is what you want to do, that's all you should be doing. All the time, every day in, day out, get up and write. Because we're all born with it, musicians, uh, we're born with it. You can't learn it. I mean, we know that. You can't, somebody who doesn't have any musical genetics whatsoever, you can't teach that.
Hmm.
But you can get better if you have it, the more
Right.
you work at it. So, it's the same thing. I went to, I went to college at LSU with Shaquille O'Neal. He was in my freshman English class. So,
Nice.
I mean, he actually put his hand on my head as he was walking by because he kind of had to lumber through, and I was holding him. I swear his fingers were on there. That's how big his hand was. They were like one side of his hand was here with the other. But he he didn't last long in that class either. As soon as the teacher asked our first paper, oh, I would like you to write 10 pages of what you think a utopia is. And okay, here goes Shaq. He puts that gigantic hand up and he says, "What's a utopia?" And I thought, oh God, here we go. So, uh, but Shaq, yes. Could he play basketball? Absolutely. But he was born with it? Absolutely. But did doing 1,000 layups make him, 1,000,000 layups make him better? Of course it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so for composing, the more you do it, the better you get at it. I still write horrible things. I still write decent things. Every once in a while I write something good. And it's it's like going to bat.
Yeah.
It's no different. Sometimes you strike out and sometimes you don't. But every time I do something, I'm better than I was before. And
Yep.
so it's just do it, and just don't stop.
Gotcha.
And you can't help but get better.
That's very true. That is very true. You keep doing it.
It's practicing. I mean,
Yeah.
musicians practice nonstop. Well, that's what there's no practice composing. You just compose. So just do it.
That's very true. We have a couple of questions that we asked everybody that's on the podcast. We're about to jump to those, but I have one final one for you. And this is just about kind of your time in LA. Do you have a favorite experience that you had? I mean, you were 19 at that point and then going through living in that city and being involved in Hollywood. Like, do you have a favorite? Like something you're like, I'm just curious, like something that stands out.
Man, I had so many great experiences with so many people and so many stars too over the years. It was crazy. Um, I had a great experience with Reba McEntire, great
Oh,
experience with Whitney Houston and Little Richard and Dudley Moore and Lady Gaga, and I mean it's just they're all people. You
right.
don't know. Oh God, Madonna, oh, Lord. Uh, they're all people, and so when you meet them, you don't know, what
Yeah,
they're going
sure.
to be. And Bill was really good friends with Paul Newman and
Hmm.
Matt. Well, there's several, Charles Bronson, and they were always over for dinner. I mean, it was an Italian thing. I mean, we all
Right.
ate dinner together, regardless of the fact that I had to go home and orchestrate all night so for them to pick it up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Because again, no internet at this point, and but I had to sit there and have dinner with everybody, just going, "Oh my God, I want to go home." But and and Paul Newman was the nicest guy, and Charles Bronson was the epitome of an introvert. He didn't say 5 words
Hmm.
ever. He was so shy too.
So interesting. I
And
would never have
then,
thought that.
and yeah, after what he plays on the screen, you're like,
Yeah.
what? So it was very, very much like that. But Whitney Houston was probably the best experience out of all of them, and for crazy reasons. But all of the awards I've done, I don't even know how many 19, 20 award shows, and so they're all pre-taped because, especially the Academy Awards, because people will get up there and then look at that front row and see, Chris Pine and whoever, right there in the front row and go, no, mm-mm,
Right.
I'm lip syncing because they know it's perfect. They don't want to get out there and mess up. Almost everybody chooses lip sync
Yeah.
because they're scared. In fact, in the Academy Awards rehearsals, there are life-size posters of the people that are going to be sitting in those chairs so they can get used to that and go,
No kidding.
oh, God, there's Michael Jackson. Oh, God, oh,
Yeah.
Jack Nicholson. And it never stops.
So, Julie, we always end these episodes with two questions. And so I'll take the first one. It's a bit more serious of a question. Do you have any books that have inspired you throughout your professional journey that you want to share with our listeners?
Yes, but it's not going to be what you think. It's going to be D&D's Monster Manual. I think
Okay.
that probably, because I played D&D all weekend, every weekend through college. And that game, I think, was the first game I'd ever played that made you step out of yourself. You
Oh.
can't, you step out of yourself to play D&D. And you create a character and you are that character and it's just so much fun and we had a group that played every weekend. So yeah, all of the D&D books really, I don't know, it just took. I've always been a gamer, but that's most gamers. That's where they started,
Right.
was
Yeah, absolutely.
was
Yes.
Dungeons and Dragons. I was really lucky. I got to play with Gary Gygax himself, the guy that wrote it. I talk about somebody
No
that was
kidding.
high all the time. Yes, yes,
No kidding.
yes. I was playing D&D when it was just a copied book. It was just copies that were
Yeah.
just riveted together. It wasn't even a real book. So when we started, that's what it was, and then of course it became what it was, and I still have all those first edition books.
Yeah.
But yeah, that book changed
I
my
got you.
life.
Well, you're here, and we love it. The last question is probably the most challenging, and it's most important to us. And it's, what is your favorite time signature?
Wow. I really like 9/8 and 12/8. I really do.
9/8
But
and 12/8.
yeah, but for certain 9/8 and 3/4 because it has built-in push all on its own because it's 3.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
the B3 always pushes to 1, so you don't have to work so hard when you're in 3. It
Yeah.
pushes it forward on its own. Whereas
Yeah.
in 4/4, it's
So,
like, oh my God, we're all gonna die in this passage at 4/4. You
that's
So
funny. Yeah,
so
I guess it's got some
yeah.
built-in forward motion. Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
no,
good one. Yeah,
yeah, that is definitely, and 5/8, all of the ones that have that push forward. I love 5/8.
absolutely.
Yeah, the one-legged
Awesome.
pirate. Yeah, it just throws you forward.
That's awesome. Julie, it's been an honor getting to speak with you today and listening to your experiences and listening to your music as well. We are so thankful that you took some time today. I know it's been a busy week for you, so thank you again for being on with us. We really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Common Time Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and we'd love it if you shared with your friends as well. We'll see you next time, but until then, keep making music and keep making a difference.